At the end of the day, all empires and all currency systems need a consumer at the center of them, somebody who is actually willing to buy the production from everybody else. In China's relationship with BRICS, that just doesn't exist. There is no consumption center in that process. China, in the post-COVID era, has basically not changed its imports at all and has dramatically expanded its exports. That's left it in trade surplus virtually every country around the world, with a notable exception of commodity exporters. And those commodity exporters in general are not rich enough or large enough to afford anything close to the production surplus China has to ship abroad. And so it just becomes a non-entity. Right? It's an unbalanced trading regime without a consumption center like the United States sitting at the center of this. You've heard me use the expression, we say all roads lead to Rome. Well, that's kind of silly, right? Roads go in both directions. So why don't we say all roads lead from Rome? Well, it's because everybody transited to sell their goods and services in the center of the empire, Rome. It was the consumption center. The United States played that role on a global stage, as we have refused to play that role by introducing trade barriers that, at least in principle, are designed to re-advantage the working members of the United States. That ultimately, puts the pressure on everybody else, and the world is closing itself off to China.
Then that's one thing. So you're not seeing an end to the US empire. You're seeing, I think you mentioned it before, it's a shift in how it's run, or a shift in, I guess, its influence on the world. Yeah,
I think that's right. And, I've made this emphasis repeatedly. I think people who are talking about the end of the empire, the end of the Roman Empire equivalence, missing a really important caveat, which is, the Roman Empire began after the Roman Republic fell. If there's anything we're at risk of in the United States, it's our loss of republic, our ability to actually actively participate in our government in a formal articulation. The American public and our elected representatives have done a remarkably poor job of advancing the interests of the United States. One of the reasons the window was open for Donald Trump to basically be the first president who said something along the lines of, I actually care about those people you call deplorables. I don't believe them, but it's a much better message than you're deplorable.
Have you thought about how that would look like in the US, or is it too hard to sort of gauge what that would be, or are we sort of moving there at the moment?
Well, I think we're already moving in that direction, right? Our elections are becoming increasingly performative. We see fewer and fewer substantive changes on change of control. I think most people would actually struggle to name their congressperson. I think many people would struggle to name their governor. I think most people would have absolutely no idea who their federal judges in their district are. We've largely abdicated our responsibility as an electorate to thoughtfully select the leadership.
So yeah, we just think about the president rather than all the other,
We think about the president. This was, the innovation of Octavian as he became Augustus Caesar was not to call himself emperor, but to call himself the first citizen, right? And performative voting continued. You continued to have the Senate. You continued to have various legislative bodies within Rome that were ostensibly elected, but at the end of the day, veto power existed with a single individual who ultimately just began to make fun of the other bodies, which is what we read about in the history books with, individuals like, I'm totally blanking on his name, declaring that, Caligula, declaring that, his horse would be a better senator than the vast majority of senators.